6 people were killed by serial killer Richard Chase in Sacramento, California, in the late 70s, and he drank their blood afterward. Serial killer Richard Chase, also known as the Vampire of Sacramento, was unusually disturbed even by the standards of his peers. From a young age on, he was plagued by a series of dangerous delusions that ultimately cost him his life. In the late 1970s, Richard Chase became notorious for murdering and dismembering 6 people in Sacramento, California. It's not surprising that Richard Chase's signature move was to imbibe the blood of his victims, given his moniker. Yet, perhaps most shocking of all, the vampire killer's bloodlust wasn't even his most disturbing characteristic. Richard Chase's father, a strict and sometimes physically abusive parent, did little to get him help when he began showing signs of mental illness at a young age. Chase had a troubled and unhappy childhood, and his problems only got worse as he got older. He started a few fires, wet the bed frequently, and showed signs of animal cruelty. Psychiatrist J.M. McDonald proposed these 3 behaviors in 1963 as a predictor of sociopathy in a patient. They are sometimes called the McDonald Triad or the Triad of Sociopathy. When Chase's father allegedly evicted him, things got even worse. Chase's use of alcohol and drugs escalated quickly once he was left unsupervised. The side effects of the psychotropic drugs he was taking made his condition worse. On more than one occasion, he was convinced that his heart had stopped beating and that he was a walking corpse, just like the vampire whose moniker he would soon adopt. Even though he was occasionally dead, he still took care of his health by, according to legend, pressing whole oranges to his forehead so that his brain could absorb the nutrients through the skin. His cranial bones, he believed, had split apart and begun shifting beneath his skin, switching places and jumbling like puzzle pieces. This was one of his more peculiar and potent delusions. To better track their whereabouts, he shaved his head. Chase was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia at the age of 25 and committed to an institution in 1975 to keep him from harming himself. The staff at the mental institution gave him the moniker Dracula after they saw him kill and try to drink the blood of several birds to counteract the effects of a poison that was, in his mind, gradually turning his own blood to powder. His attempt to inject himself with rabbit blood, which made him violently ill, led to his confinement in a mental institution. Chase had been involved in a number of similar incidents, but the staff was confident they had successfully rehabilitated him and sent him home to his mother. It was a fatal choice because Chase's health was deteriorating, not improving. Despite being released into his mother's care, Richard Chase was not required to live with her under any circumstances. His release from the mental institution coincided with his departure. He explained later that he left because he was convinced his mother was poisoning him. A group of young men he considered friends moved into the apartment with him. But it seems they didn't know Chase very well, because they asked him to leave when his strange habits persisted, such as being constantly high from drug use and a penchant for going about the apartment naked. The easiest solution for Richard Chase's sometimes roommates seemed to be to leave the apartment and find new digs, but he refused. Chase had returned to his previous lifestyle of independence, which almost always exacerbated the symptoms of his condition. There was a revival of his preteen interest in blood, and he began hunting and killing rodents. He sometimes drank a mixture of their organs and soda. In the Lake Tahoe area late one night in August of 1977, police in Nevada discovered him covered in blood and carrying a bucket containing a liver in the back of his pickup. They released Chase after concluding the blood and organ were from a bovine rather than a human. Once again, Richard Chase managed to avoid the systems that were put in place to aid him and keep him and others safe from harm. Since there was no one else around to keep an eye on him, his delusions grew stronger, and he eventually did the unthinkable in order to satisfy them. On that day in December of 1977, Richard Chase was feeling down and isolated. He remembered being upset that his mother hadn't let him come home for Christmas. His first victim was a 51-year-old man named Ambrose Griffin, who was helping his wife bring in groceries. Chase pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and shot him in the chest as he drove down their street. And so, an obsession began. During the early morning hours of January 23, 1978, Chase entered the home of pregnant Teresa Wallin through an unlocked front door. During questioning, he explained that he interpreted an unlocked door as an invitation and a justification for his subsequent actions. After that, anyone who fell victim to him had to have left their door unlocked. It was the same gun that Richard Chase used to shoot Griffin, and he used it 3 times to kill Teresa Wallin. Chase then butchered her, slit open her stomach, drank her blood, and ate her organs. Reports say he drank out of a yogurt tub. The murders Chase committed in the end were the most heinous of his entire career. It was only 4 days after Wallin's murder when Chase discovered Evelyn Myritha's door unlocked on January 27. Her 6-year-old son Jason Miroth, her 22-month-old nephew David Ferreira, and her friend Dan Meredith were inside. A gunshot to the head killed Meredith as she walked down the hall. Chase then absconded with his car keys. Jason and Evelyn were discovered in Evelyn's room. 2 bullets had entered the boy's head. Part of Evelyn was eaten. Several of her internal organs were severed and removed from her stomach. One of her eyes had been gouged out, and her body had been sodomized. David Ferreira, the infant that Evelyn Miroth had been watching, was nowhere to be found. Months later, the decapitated body of the child was discovered behind a church. During Chase's trial, the details of what happened that night became public. The vampire killer of Sacramento was startled by the knock of a visitor, and he or she then stole Meredith's car and drove off with Ferreira's body. When the guest saw something suspicious, he or she informed a neighbor, who in turn called the police. Chase's fingerprints were found in Myritha's blood, allowing the police to positively identify him. All of Chase's cooking utensils were covered in blood, and his refrigerator held human brains, according to the police. This time Chase got the boot. The Vampire of Sacramento's sensational trial began on January 2, 1979, and lasted for 5 months. Due to Chase's not being guilty by reason of insanity, the defense team argued against the death penalty being recommended. The jury sided with the prosecution after 5 hours of deliberation. After being found guilty on 6 counts of murder, vampire killer Richard Chase was sentenced to death by gas chamber. Inmates knew of his criminal past and feared him as a result. They constantly pushed him towards suicide. That's exactly what Richard Chase did. He hoarded enough of the anti-anxiety medication he was given by the jail staff to kill himself with. After Christmas in 1980, he was discovered dead in his cell.